Can we go to gallery view again?
Yeah.
That's it. Hello, you hear me? Very nice to see you all. I hope that the program isn't like too packed for you. Because here I've got all my meals cooked for me. All I have to do is, I don't know, leave the shrine room and there's a plate waiting. So I hope you've got to actually probably do things, haven't you? Cook and washing up and things like that, which I don't have to do. Lots of nods, lots of vigorous nods. So I hope that you're keeping up, as it were. We've sort of just kept the program as we would have done for an in-person retreat, if you see what I mean. And hopefully that, if it starts to, I don't know, get too much, then perhaps we'll have to think again. But it would be a shame to have less meditation, I think, because there's a lot of input, and I like the fact that there's a lot of meditation as well to try and absorb things. Very nice to see you, and thanks for staying with it. It's very heartening to see you turning up again and again, because on night one, on the first day, I was thinking, oh dear, I'm on first thing, and if I give a lemon of a talk, that's going to be it for the retreat. So it's very good that you've stayed with it. So thank you for that.
Mitra and Dharmajit, say hello.
The Kasha Mitra and Dharmajit, my chapter apparently are joining tonight instead of a chapter meeting. So hello, men from my chapter. Very, very good. And Dharmajit, hello to you.
And Vimoksha says he's enjoying the intensity.
Vimoksha says he's enjoying the intensity. That's good, isn't it? That's well done, Vimoksha. That's great. That's good to hear. So let's just give people another few seconds to arrive if they're arriving. And just to say that we are going to make these recordings public as well. So just to let you know that they will be public. Okay, very, very good. So here we are on day whatever it is, and I want to continue talking a little bit about the myth of self-development or self-transcendence, as we've been calling it. And goodness, the more Maitreya Bandhu and I sort of talk, I think we're both extrovert thinkers, so I do a lot of my thinking as I'm talking. Hence, it might come out a bit sort of garbled or incoherent. But the more we sort of seem to do that, the more there seems to be to explore. I do think there's a lot in this material that Subhuti has just come up with. And he has a very, very concise style. So again, I would recommend reading Subhuti's article in Majjhimavani, and also the interview with Vishwapani, if you can find it. So yeah, I'm going to carry on talking a little bit about self-development. And well, before I do that, I want to say something a bit more generally about myths or views. I mentioned, I think, on the first night that I preferred the word myth because views can sound like they're just cognitive positions, philosophical positions, as if you can choose whether you're going to adopt this position or that position or no position, whereas myth seems to imply a broader and deeper orientation of one's life that involves every aspect of one's life. And just chatting with Maitreya Bandhu after supper, we were saying that we're in the grip of a myth, or more than one myths. It's not that we can, it's not that they're you can choose not to have one, or which one. We are in the grip of these myths because they're not always very conscious. And part of what I think we're trying to do, and what Subhuti was indicating, was that, look, these myths they're useful, they have validity. They're not absolute truth. Of course they're not absolute truth, because absolute reality, absolute truth, you can say nothing about. You can point and you can have images. You can't talk about. As soon as you talk about, you falsify. So of course these myths aren't absolute truth, and yet they're really, really necessary. They're necessary for moving from the unenlightened state to the enlightened state. How else are we going to move, progress, grow, in this case, in the myth of self-development? How are we going to do that unless we have some sort of orientation that guides us, something that leads us on the way? But what Subhuti is saying is that any myth that we have will have a front and a back, and you can't avoid the fact that it's got a front and a back. So one way of avoiding the pitfalls of any particular myth is to make it more conscious that we are in the grip of a myth and that we're using a myth. And if we can make it more conscious, and we can make the fact that there's a front and a back more conscious, then perhaps we can avoid some of the pitfalls. That, just bringing awareness to it. And also, if we can realize that our way of thinking, orienting, approaching the Dharma life is not the only way of doing so, that there are other ways of perceiving and conceiving about the goal and the path. And that might also help us to hold whatever myth that we're drawn to or in the grip of, hold it a bit more lightly. Because I think if we can hold these as metaphors rather than as literal truths, we're protected a little bit from the backside, as it were, of these myths. So do you see, that's what we're trying to do? We're trying to bring into awareness something that is inevitable. We need myths. Even, for example, even the kind of postmodern notion that I have no myth, that I just am completely staying with bare attention and bare experience. That's another view. Do you see what I mean? That's just a myth. That's another myth with its own front and back to it. It's not absolute truth, because absolute truth is not something that we can grasp with our minds. And even the notion that bare attention reveals absolute reality is just a myth. Because remember, I was saying, what was I saying earlier on? I was saying that our minds condition, co-create the world of experience. So there's no such thing as, you can't get out of that. There's no such thing as saying bare attention will not create any falsification or fabrication, as Rob Berbier puts it. There's no way out of that co-creation. That is what happens. That's what partly emptiness means. In fact, I think that if we get stuck in this thing about bare attention, that I've got no myth, no metaphysics, I'm just going to stay with direct experience and see what unfolds, I think there's the backside of that myth, which it is nihilism, that there's nothing beyond this experience. Yeah. So you can't avoid a front and a back. That's what I'm trying to say. I just found this little quote from Bhante from Know Your Mind as I was leaving the shrine room here, and this is Bhante saying, when the Buddha says mental states are preceded by mind, led by mind, and made up of mind, he is not airing a philosophical speculation, but expressing an insight which can guide and transform one's whole way of life. When the Buddha says mental states are preceded by mind, led by mind, and made up of mind, he is not airing a philosophical speculation, but expressing an insight which can guide and transform one's whole way of life. So I think that puts it better than I can, that this whole idea that mind is intimately involved, has to be involved in creating experience. It's part of, because subject and object are not distinct. Mind and world are not distinct. They colorize. But you know, Bhante is saying that's an insight, not a philosophical argument. One of the things Subhuti goes into, because some people he's sort of suggesting might think all of this sort of talking about myths in this rather complex way is abstract and maybe doesn't apply to them. What he then goes on to say is that, look, these myths, or the myths that we're in the grip of, have psychological, methodological, social and moral consequences. So I'm just going to briefly go through those psychological, methodological, social and moral consequences. So psychological, yesterday evening, for those of you who are here, and if you weren't, you can watch on catch up, Maitreya Bandhu was talking about the front and the back of this myth of self-transcendence or self-development. And he was pointing out that one of the psychological unfortunate consequences can be a state of feeling inadequate and therefore despondent. If you feel that this whole linear kind of model of Sila, Samadhi, Prajna, A, B, C, if you feel that you're never getting past the first stage enough anyway, then it can lead to a feeling of inadequacy. That's an unfortunate psychological consequence that can arise from that particular myth. A positive psychological consequence would be, I guess, a sense of there's somewhere to go, that you can grow, that there's a possibility to become more than we are now. And here's a path to that, which would then add a sense of meaning and purpose to one's life. That would be a positive correlate of that. That's a psychological kind of consequence. A methodological is just a big word for saying it will be drawn to certain practices that might foreground particular myths. Actually, all practices will probably have all the myths involved, but self-transcendence or self-development is particularly the myth of using one's will to move towards Buddhahood. And certain practices will foreground that. Bante's given us the 6-element practice as the sort of key core Vipassana practice for our order. And you can see how it's a self-transcendence practice in a way, or at least one could see it like that. You know, you look at experience and then you disidentify with the elements and let them go. You go beyond the limited notion of body and egoistic consciousness. You transcend. Methodological consequences. So, for example, people who are drawn to pure awareness, that obviously is, or just sitting, is foregrounding self-discovery, as is insight inquiry in another way, foregrounding self-discovery. The truth is within. So they have methodological consequences. They also have social consequences. So do we need a Sangha or not? Some myths might say we do, some myths might not put so much importance on Sangha. So for example, self-transcendence, self-development, that myth of growth will definitely say that supportive conditions are really helpful, are really necessary, which then gives a meaning to needing Sangha as a support. Also, if you have the overarching vision of the Bodhisattva ideal, then Sangha becomes a way of channeling altruistic activity. That's putting it very clumsy, but creating Sangha, helping to create Sangha is part of a Bodhisattva's activity. Whereas if the main predominant myth is the truth is within, then perhaps there's not so much of a need for Sangha. Perhaps. I find it interesting that many Western Buddhist teachers are privileging that myth, and there isn't such an emphasis on Sangha amongst many Western teachers. I don't know if they're linked or not. Moral consequences, Subhuti says. Well, again, what he points out is that, you might think, do I follow the guidance and ethical principles given to me by a teacher or by the Buddha, or do I discover my own values from within? And certainly in our postmodern culture, there's a real emphasis of discovering the truth and our values, including our ethical values, from within. This whole phraseology of this is my truth, I'm going to speak my truth. It's got currency. By the way, I'm not trying to say when I say that self-discovery doesn't have real values and pros. We'll come on to self-discovery. I think it's a valuable, very beautiful way of also approaching the Dharma, a necessary one perhaps. But yes, I hope that that maybe fleshes out a little bit why these myths, whether you consciously think of them or not, why they have an effect at all levels of our Dharma life, how we interact with other people, what we privilege, what practices we privilege, what psychological states we might be prey to. And yes, I'm also challenging, I'm prepared to be challenged back, but I'm challenging that there's no such thing as not having some sort of myth in the Dharma life. Even thinking that you don't have one is a sort of myth in the Dharma life, with all sorts of assumptions behind it. Okay, so that's a sort of preface. So let me come to talking a little bit more about self-transcendence. One of the things Bhante, I guess, has really emphasized is that in order to see through the delusion of a fixed and separate self, you have to build a healthy sense of self. You have to build a sense of self that is integrated, or is relatively integrated and relatively emotionally positive. I think this is such an important teaching, but of course it's bread and butter to us, and we can sort of forget it, easily forget how important that is. In his language of the true individual, you could say that what he's saying is that you keep leaving behind a smaller self, you transcend it into a bigger self, and into a bigger self still, into a bigger self still, until you become part of the Bodhisattva. That you keep leaving limited small self for bigger self. Very, very positive way of talking, one that in a way challenges a more nihilistic wrong assumption of anatta. You know how you meet newcomers these days. Newcomers, as Maitreya Bandhu was pointing out, aren't really newcomers. Most people I meet when they come to the Buddhist Center have got some idea about the Dharma. you know, I was teaching recently a newcomers course before we went into lockdown, and this woman had an A level in Buddhism. And I thought, oh my goodness, and then I now know PhDs in Buddhism, and etc. But also people have encountered lots of other teachers, and maybe read, or maybe online, or even met them. So often people come with ideas, and sometimes, I mean, they're so wrong. I've met more than one person, in fact, quite recently, who was really adamant, having practiced the Dharma for, I don't know, 2 or 3 years or whatever, really adamant that meditation was just not useful, because it was just bolstering egotism, and the truth lay in just being and not doing anything. Oh goodness, where do you start? Did you see what I mean? And this is somebody in their 20s, and yeah, where do you start? I really wished we were sitting in my room, and I thought, if I was a Zen master and you were in a Zen, you know, you were in a Zen monastery, you'd get 30 blows for saying that, but I couldn't do that, of course. So, although I did manage to say, you have no idea what you're talking about, which did seem to be a bit like a Zen master's blow. It was the closest I got. So, but yeah, we're encountering people with all sorts of views, you know, and I think it's really helpful that Bante's given us this myth of growth, that anatta isn't a nihilistic denial of self. It's saying that you can become more, that there's no limit to how much more you can become, that the self isn't a static, fixed thing. You can transcend it, you can grow, you can transcend the limitations. And also what he's given us is, of course, he's given us meditation practices for this growth, but he's given us much more than just meditation practices, much more than just even books and Dharma teachings. He's given us a world. That's what I keep feeling, that he's given us a world. He's given us Sangha. I mean, we are the world, of course, as it were. One wants to break into song, but I mean, he's given us each other, this Sangha, and all the institutions of the Sangha, that one can be immersed in or partake of as much or as little as one wants. He's given us a world of life with its indirect practices as well. His emphasis on art, on creativity, on beauty, on friendship, they enable growth in all directions. He talks about growing as a cabbage grows. I like that. I didn't know about that. My Taranda was telling me a cabbage grows in all directions together, all at once. And that part of this myth of self-transcendence or self-development is implying that growth in all directions. I remember reading a book about Jack Cornfield. Well, no, not about Jack Cornfield. It was by Jack Cornfield. It was also about him. It was a personal book called Bringing the Dharma to the West. And in it, he's talking about his own Dharma life. And, you know, he trained as a young man in the Thai forest tradition and the Burmese Satipatthana tradition, with 5 years of intensive meditation. And anyway, somewhere in this book, and I'm quoting from memory, so I probably get it slightly wrong, let me know if I have. Somewhere in this book, he talks about having, well, for those 5 years, he was able to ascend into very beautiful meditative states. He mastered the dhyanas and so forth. And then he says he came back to the West and he tried he was living a monastic life, a celibate life, and then he tried having a girlfriend. and realized that he knew not a thing about how to relate to people in the ordinary Western world. He knew not a thing. He said, and all his meditative attainments and achievements that he was quite proud of, probably, vanished in this new situation. Yeah, they'd gone. Bante's given us a world that involves growing in all directions, including how to relate to each other, how to form friendships. Friendship feels, I don't know if you're my age, or, well, I don't know why I say that actually. But anyway, as I grow older, it does feel like friendship feels one of the richest gifts that Bhante has given us, given me. The friendships in my life are just incredibly rich. I can remember when I was newly ordained, and we had a men's order weekend at Padmaloka, and I think I may have been organizing it or something. Anyway, there was one of the talks was called, or the weekend was on the theme of friendship as a path to insight. And I remember Subhuti saying to me, well, you could have easily said it the other way around, insight as a path to friendship. And at the time I thought, yeah, sort of, but I'm not really interested. And but increasingly, as I hopefully mature, I think, oh yes, I can see insight as a path to friendship, to real friendship. That's real meaning in my life, real value. Anyway, Bhante has given us a whole world. That's what I'm trying to say. That's all part of, I think, this myth of self-development. Maitreya Bandhu last night, was talking about form. And this myth, I think all the myths have form to them. This myth, self-development, self-transcendence, particularly seems to be supportive of the forms of our movement, the institutions of our movement. So many people of a generation before me, couple of generations before I came along, gave their lives to build the institutions of the movement. Mangala's here right in the center of the screen as one of those early order members who I feel a debt of gratitude to for building the movement, which I've not only benefited from, but in a way it has become my world, my life. And yes, self-transcendence, I think, gives support to the building of institutions in the Sangha, which so many people need. If the myth had just been, like this young person was telling me, don't meditate, just be, and he even said that involved just lying on his bed. If that was the myth, you wouldn't have our movement. You just wouldn't have got it. So Sangha and our movement and the institutions of our movement. I think that as order members, I know not all order members are involved in the movement, nor do they want to be or need to be. But I think that I really hope that as order members we can value and support the movement, even if we're not involved in it. If you sort of mean, not everybody has to be teaching in centres or involved in centres, or even fewer people are living in communities, or and so forth. But support it by supporting people who are involved, but also just with appreciation. I think our appreciation is a real support. I find that. Whereas I think that it is too easy to start thinking that the movement is just, and the institutions are just obstacles to insight. That the real work of insight happens on one's own, in one's, on one's, I don't know how, but do nod if you know what I mean. Good. Anyway, one of the things I want to say is that as we practice, this myth of self-development might not be the one that we're more and more drawn to. You know, self-surrender and self-discovery might become more and more important to us. They certainly have for me. And what I think I need to remember is that for most people coming along who are new to the Dharma life, self-development is a vital, vital myth. The other myths might not, they can undermine the path, if you see what I mean. When most people come along, as Maitreya Bandhu was saying last night, they need something to do. So I think as order members, it's beholden on us to not undermine that myth, even if it's not the most relevant myth for us now. I hope that makes sense. Yeah, because we're in it collectively. We're in it collectively. It's not just about my insight or your insight. We're building a collective. I don't know what we're doing, but it's definitely collective. Which has to be, it has to be, doesn't it? Because if reality transcends self and other, then working on just insight for oneself can't be a complete transcendence. Do you want to say anything else, Maitreya Bandhu, to it? Is that? No? Okay. But yes, I then want to come on to some of the the back end of this myth. Maitreya Bandhu talked about several backs to this myth, including feelings of inadequacy. I know what that's like, actually. When I first came to the Dharma, it wasn't in Triratna, it was in a Zen group. It was an offshoot of the Zen group that was part of the Buddhist Society in London. I was 19, a student, and really inspired by what I'd read about the Dharma, thought of myself as a Buddhist, hadn't ever practiced anything remotely Dharmic, but you know how I was probably like that young person I was talking about, was head full of ideas and lots of chat and lots of talk, boring all my friends with my Buddhism. Anyway, I joined I started going along to a Zen group and hoping that I would meet a Zen master who would immediately recognize my true nature and, you know, I don't know, do whatever they do. He didn't. And then I thought, okay, well, I mean, I was the youngest person there at this group by a long, long way. And I thought he would teach me to meditate, and he didn't. And instead, what he said is, look, you need to become more mindful. In fact, that was his thing for everybody. It wasn't just uniquely me. You need to become more disciplined and mindful. And the task was daily life practice, which was discipline your life, make it routine, eat at the same time every day, get up at the same time every day, go to bed at the same time every day, not vary it by a minute, like literally the same time every day. And do one thing at a time, be really fully immersed in what you're doing, washing up is washing up, etc., etc. When you resist all of this, when you resist getting up at whatever time, you could set your own time, but you had to stick to it. When you resist, that reaction that would happen was good, because that would be wearing down the ego. This is based on the ox herding pictures, of course. And what you had to do when you found yourself reacting was bow to your own reaction, to the anger, and that would be part of the wearing down. anyway, I mean, I was all really excited by this, and so set myself a time to go to bed. It was set my time to get up. I was living in a student house, and I can remember, for example, going down. I was with my housemates down the pub, and Tim, one of my housemates, they were all really supportive of me and my Buddhism. And one of them, it was probably closing time or something, and he looked at me and said, "Shouldn't you be in bed?" And I looked at him and thought, "Oh, gee, I need to be in bed." And I still had a whole pint to drink. And I can remember downing this pint. It's the quickest pint that I've ever downed. And then jumping on my bike. I was probably just slightly tipsy, jumping on my bike to rush home so that I could jump into bed and not be late for my Zen practice. And I did this for I tried anyway, on and off for about a year. It was on and off because I would do it during term time, and then I felt that out of term time, you know, I was on holiday. So I did it during term time. And eventually I had to give up. I mean, partly it was starting to affect my studies because, you know, there were times when I had to work late into the night just to get things done, etc. And I gave up. And I was too ashamed and embarrassed to go back to this teacher, my first Buddhist teacher, Clive Sherlock, too embarrassed to go back to him and say, "I can't do this." Instead, I just stopped going along. I stopped going along and felt that Buddhism, Zen Buddhism, was still true. It was the way to the truth, but I was far too undisciplined and unmotivated and inadequate to the task. I wasn't prepared to renounce enough, etc. And that stopped me looking for the Dharma for another 9 years. You know, anyway, I won't go into the story of my life, it was fine. But, and I'm sort of glad that I found Triratna when I did. But yes, feelings of inadequacy in this myth. So we've got to watch. Actually, you can go the other way, can't you? You can have triumphalism as well. You know, like last night, Maitreya Bandhu was saying some of the forms of this myth that have helped us. You know, we've got a path of regular steps, which has been tremendously useful. And somebody can become a mitra, and then they can ask for ordination, and they can become ordained, and so forth. Well, one of the dangers of that sort of path, I've noticed, is ordination can become the goal for people, can't it? As if it's the end in itself. So somebody can be really enthusiastic as a mitra and then lose. I'm sure that doesn't apply to anybody here. I mean, the enthusiasm applies, I'm sure that and then they're ordained, and that's as if that's the end of their motivation, their enthusiasm. The path of regular steps isn't so laid out after ordination. It's not so easy to see and spot. And yeah, I've seen people's sort of Dharma lives stagnate at ordination or very, very soon after. So that's a sort of danger of this progressive path of regular steps, that you mistake any of the intermediate goals for the end point. Yeah. Another sort of danger or back, I think, of the Sangha. You know, this incredible thing that Bante's set in motion and created and is very much alive amongst us, this mysterious thing called the Sangha. Another sort of danger of it is, of course, it becoming reduced to a group. Bante's teaching of the group and the individual and the spiritual community is gold, I think, and sometimes overlooked. because we're also familiar with it. It's so easy to become, Bhante is so clear that I find anyway, that if I'm not careful, I can feel that, I can think that I understand what he's getting at without really understanding the profundity of what he's getting at. Anyway, the group, the individual, and the spiritual community, I think the spiritual community, the Sangha, as we know, can sometimes descend to the level of the group. And what I mean, we probably do that in all sorts of ways, and I do that in all sorts of ways. But what I particularly have in mind is in the order, us sort of forgetting our priorities. Sometimes, I'm not, please don't assume I'm talking about you, but what am I trying to say? It's sometimes in the order, conversations in the order. It's as if we've forgotten that our priority is enlightenment, Buddhahood, for the sake of all beings. And we prioritize lesser goals, good goals, but lesser ones. It's like we get the order wrong, the sequence wrong. So what I have in mind is really worthy aims like environmentalism, helping or doing our bit or trying to do what we can. Of course, that's great, but not as an end in itself. And I'm not sure that people mean it to be an end in itself. All I'm trying to say is that it can easily seem that way, that these more very important but lesser goals start to seem like that's what we're about. And then I think we've forgotten the transcendental aspect of this myth. One of my sort of concerns is that we become a really goodly group, liberal, well-meaning, kind group, social group. That, for example, diversity. There's a lot of talk about diversity in our Sangha at the moment, racial diversity. Of course, diversity can be another type in other ways. But yeah, racial diversity. And yeah, who could argue against racial diversity? Of course, it would be great. Personally, I think we've just sort of watched that it doesn't become an end in itself. Our Sangha could be really, really racially diverse and still not have transcended to enlightenment or forgotten about enlightenment. We could be a really diverse social group. That's what I'm trying to say. So it's not an end in itself. It's a means, and it's, of course, one wants to spread the Dharma to as many groups and types of people as we can, but not as an end in itself. At least I'm not interested in that. I think we just have to watch out for lesser goals. Not that they're wrong, but it's the priority. It's not even the priority. I don't know how to put it. It's almost like a category error. We want to, hopefully, follow the Bodhisattva path to, liberate ourselves and then liberate all beings, or maybe not even and then. But it is liberation that we're trying to do, not just welcome people into a comfortable, friendly social group. One of the reasons why I think that is a shame, if that's what happens in our centres or our institutions or our groupings, gatherings, what I think is a shame is that we're not going to be very attractive to young people. We wouldn't have been very attractive to me as a 19-year-old if what we were presenting was just a friendly social group. I think young people, well, all of us hopefully, but young people do come to us looking for a radical vision for existence, for human life. We just got to remember that radical edge amongst us. Okay, I could caveat all of that, but I think I'll kind of leave that as it is. Yeah, perhaps I'll wrap up there. So what I was saying was that these myths are not just cognitive; they affect our whole orientation to our Dharma lives. That we don't necessarily have much choice about them in a certain sense, although different temperaments will be drawn to different ones. But part of what we're trying to do is make them conscious. They can be really helpful. In fact, they're needed. But if we grasp them too tightly, then we are likely to go wrong. There are lots of ways of going wrong, as it were. And also if we don't recognize that they are only relative truths, that there are other ways of perceiving the Dharma life and orientating ourselves to the Dharma life. And hopefully that means that we don't grasp them too tightly and we don't get stuck in one particular mode. So I was talking about that, and I talked a little bit more about self-development, self-transcendence, and particularly Bante's path of growth as really very valuable. It sort of undercuts a nihilistic interpretation of anatta, and it's also very, very necessary for most people, I would say, particularly in the early stages of their Dharma life. And it's beholden on us to not undermine that, even if for us it might be that self-transcendence, self-development doesn't speak to us anymore as much as some of the other myths might be. I talked a little bit about Sangha and also about some indirect methods of growth that Bhante has given us, friendship particularly. I think this myth of self-transcendence is relational, it's bound up with other people. And I think that's one of its real strengths. Its real strengths. Of course, it means that in the Sangha we have issues, we fall out with each other, we disagree with each other, and of course that's painful. Sangha is a difficult practice, a demanding practice, but engaging in Sangha surely, well, I have to keep reminding myself, is surely worth doing, because that's what erodes or can help erode a limited sense of self, a separate self. And perhaps finally to say that even if self-development, self-transcendence doesn't speak to you very much at the moment, the key thing about this myth is the use of will. And I believe that we can't get away from the use of will, at least in some form or other. Even when the bodhicitta, if you think in those terms, has arisen, there will still be transformation to be doing, if you see what I mean, which will take some sort of effort. Even if your main practice is just sitting in pure awareness, it will take some will, believe me, it does, to get onto the cushion in the first place. If we're going to create a world of mythship, which the world really needs, if we're going to exemplify Sangha, that will take will. So I don't think this myth is dispensable. I think it underpins everything else. And I think it's important to be wise to some of its dangers and drawbacks. And I think some people in the order have been fair enough when they've criticised it, this developmental model, because I think it does have its drawbacks. We just need to be intelligent about that. Okay, I'm going to leave it there. So thank you very much, and let's have a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back at UK time. It will be 8:30, and Maitra Bandhu will lead us in tonight's puja. Thank you very much.
Okay, then let's start preparing Puja. We will, yes, I'll try and remember. It's weirdly difficult to remember to salute the shrine. I'm looking at the shrine in the picture, and one forgets. Strange how the camera starts to take over reality. So once we're all gathered, we're all just gathering, but once we're all gathered, we'll salute the shrine. Thank you, Jnanavaca, for your talk. So I'll just wait for a moment whilst you gather, all in our different time zones. Okay, so we'll start by saluting. Namo Buddhaya.
Namo Buddhaya.
Namo Dhammaya.
Namo Dhammaya.
Namo Sanghaya.
Namo Sanghaya.
Namo Namah.
Om. Om.
Okay, so we'll perform the puja that we did yesterday. We'll have again a reading from Bante's memoirs. As Jnanavaca said, I'm with others compiling a book which is going to be called Life is King, Sangharakshita in his own words, in which, Bante just talks about the different elements of his life. And the bits I've selected for the retreat are all from a chapter called Mystic, but there's also going to be chapters on child, lover, teacher, friend, and so on. Yeah, so that's what these are from. And then Lizzie at the end is going to chant the Padmasambhava mantra. While Jnanavaca was talking, it really reminded me of Bante talking about the sevenfold puja itself as a kind of epitome of the path of development, or the self-development, of self-transcendence. And if you remember, I don't know if you remember this, Bante says the worship is like a glimpse of a mountain peak in the distance. In the worship section, it's just a glimpse of vision and a kind of wow. And then you realize in salutation that mountain peak is a long, long way away. You realize there's a gap between you and the mountain peak. And then in going for refuge, you decide to bridge that gap. So it's a clear picture of self-development. You decide that vision you've had is so inspiring, even though it's distant. You decide you want to bridge that gap, and you go for refuge. And you bridge that gap by practicing the refuges and precepts. And of course, as you make progress towards that ideal in the puja, you realize that there are all sorts of things holding you back, all kinds of unskillfulnesses, all sorts of delusions holding you back. So you realize you need to get rid of all those things that are holding you back. So it's like a traveler going over terrain, throwing off all the kit that he doesn't need, that is just sort of impeding his progress. And then Bante says that once you've done that, you can just rejoice that you're making this progress towards enlightenment. And as you get closer, you can then start to ask for a teaching. Finally, you ask for a teaching in the Treaty of Supplication, and then you gain enlightenment by hearing the Heart Sutra. So that and then of course you want everyone to gain enlightenment, because you've seen that it's everybody's real need. You've gained enlightenment, you want everybody to gain enlightenment. So you perform the transcendental of merit and self-surrender. So Bante's vision of the puja is that it encapsulates the whole of the spiritual life, using very much this this myth of self-transcendence. You see the vision and you take ever greater steps towards it, become enlightened, and then want others to become enlightened as well. So whilst we're performing the puja, we might remember Bante's way of reading those great 7 stages of the puja as the path of spiritual life. Okay, so let's close our eyes, and then when Jnanavaca feels ready, he'll read from Bante's memoirs.
Padmasambhava came into my life the first time I visited the Tamang Buddhist Gompa in Darjeeling. This must have been in the early 1950s, shortly after I settled in Kalimpong. But though great was the impression made on me by the lifelike image in the Gompa, it was not until October 1962 that my relationship with the precious Guru was ritually confirmed when I received in Kalimpong the Padmasambhava initiation from Kachu Rinpoche, the abbot of Pemagangse Gompa in western Sikkim. In the course of the 2-day initiation, he explained to me how I was to meditate on Padmasambhava and gave me the name of Urgyen, this being the Tibetan form of Udayana, a part of northwest India associated with the early life of the great Guru. Kacha Rinpoche also explained how I was to do the going for refuge and prostration practice with Padmasambhava as the object of refuge. This practice I did regularly until my departure to the UK in 1964, by which time I had done it a total of 20,000 times. Not a lot by Tibetan Buddhist standards. After the founding of the FWO/Tri Ratna in 1967, I taught the practice to a number of order members, some of whom have in turn taught it to others. Thus, Padmasambhava has been present in the life of the order from the very beginning, and he continues to be in it and part of it to the present day.
The sevenfold puja, firstly worship. With Mandarava, blue lotus and jasmine.
With Mandarava, blue lotus and jasmine.
With all flowers pleasing and fragrant.
With all flowers pleasing and fragrant.
And with garlands skillfully woven.
And with garlands skillfully woven.
I pay honor to the princes of the sages.
I pay honor to the princes of the sages,
so worthy of veneration.
so worthy of veneration.
I envelop them in clouds of incense,
I envelop them in clouds of incense,
sweet and penetrating.
sweet and penetrating.
I make them offerings of food, hard and soft,
I make them offerings of food, hard and soft,
and pleasing kinds of liquids to drink.
and pleasing kinds of liquids to drink.
I offer them lamps encrusted with jewels,
I offer them lamps encrusted with jewels,
festooned with golden lotus,
festooned with golden lotus,
on the paving sprinkled with perfume.
on the paving sprinkled with perfume.
I scatter handfuls of beautiful flowers.
I scatter handfuls of beautiful flowers.
Salutation. As many atoms as there are,
As many atoms as there are,
in the 1,000,000,000 worlds,
in the 1,000,000,000 worlds,
so many times I make reverent salutation
so many times I make reverent salutation
to all the Buddhas of the 3 eras,
to all the Buddhas of the 3 eras,
to the Saddharma,
to the Saddharma,
and to the excellent community.
and to the excellent community.
I pay homage to all the shrines
I pay homage to all the shrines
and places in which the Bodhisattvas have been.
and places in which the Bodhisattvas have been.
I make profound obeisance to the teachers
I make profound obeisance to the teachers
and those to whom respectful salutation is due.
and those to whom respectful salutation is due.
Going to refuge. This very day,
This very day,
I go for my refuge
I go for my refuge
to the powerful protectors,
to the powerful protectors,
whose purpose is to guard the universe,
whose purpose is to guard the universe,
the mighty conquerors who overcome suffering everywhere.
the mighty conquerors who overcome suffering everywhere.
Wholeheartedly also I take my refuge
Wholeheartedly also I take my refuge
in the Dharma they have ascertained,
in the Dharma they have ascertained,
which is the abode of security against the rounds of rebirth.
which is the abode of security against the rounds of rebirth.
Likewise, in the host of bodhisattvas,
Likewise, in the host of bodhisattvas,
I take my refuge.
I take my refuge.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang saranam gacchami, dhammang saranam gacchami, sanghang saranam gacchami, dutiyampi buddhang saranam gacchami, dutiyampi dhammang saranam gacchami, dutiyampi sanghang saranam gacchami, tatiyampi buddhang saranam gacchami, tatiyampi dhammang saranam gacchami, tatiyampi sanghang saranam gacchami. Anatipata veruni sikapadam samadhyami adinadana veruni Sekapalam Samadhyami Kametsu Nechachara Veramani Sekapalam Samadhyami Musavada Veramani Sekapalam Samadhyami Suvamirya Maja Amadhanam Veramani Sekapalam Samadhyami Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. With deeds of loving kindness, I purify my body. With open-handed generosity, I purify my body. With stillness, simplicity, and contentment, I purify my body. With truthful communication, I purify my speech. With mindfulness clear and radiant, I purify my mind. Confession of faults. The evil that I have heaped up.
The evil that I have heaped up.
Through my ignorance and foolishness.
Through my ignorance and foolishness.
Evil in the world of everyday experience.
Evil in the world of everyday experience.
As well as evil in understanding and intelligence.
As well as evil in understanding and intelligence.
All that I acknowledge to the protectors.
All that I acknowledge to the protectors.
Standing before them.
Standing before them.
With hands raised in reverence.
With hands raised in reverence.
And terrified of suffering.
And terrified of suffering.
I pay salutations again and again.
I pay salutations again and again.
May the leaders receive this kindly.
May the leaders receive this kindly.
Just as it is with its many faults.
Just as it is with its many faults.
What is not good, O protectors?
What is not good, O protectors?
I shall not do again.
I shall not do again.
Rejoicing in merit. I rejoice with delight.
I rejoice with delight.
In the good done by all beings.
In the good done by all beings.
Through which they obtain rest.
Through which they obtain rest.
With the end of suffering.
With the end of suffering.
May those who have suffered be happy.
May those who have suffered be happy.
I rejoice in the release of beings.
I rejoice in the release of beings.
From the sufferings of the rounds of existence.
From the sufferings of the rounds of existence.
I rejoice in the nature of the Bodhisattva.
I rejoice in the nature of the Bodhisattva.
And the Buddha.
And the Buddha.
Who are protectors.
Who are protectors.
I rejoice in the arising of the will to enlightenment.
I rejoice in the arising of the will to enlightenment.
And the teaching.
And the teaching.
Those oceans that bring happiness to all beings.
Those oceans that bring happiness to all beings.
And are the abode of welfare of all beings.
And are the abode of welfare of all beings.
Entreaty and supplication. Saluting them with folded hands.
Saluting them with folded hands.
I entreat the Buddhas in all the quarters.
I entreat the Buddhas in all the quarters.
May they make shine the lamp of the Dharma.
May they make shine the lamp of the Dharma.
For those wandering in the suffering of delusion.
For those wandering in the suffering of delusion.
With hands folded in reverence.
With hands folded in reverence.
I implore the conquerors desiring to enter Nirvana.
I implore the conquerors desiring to enter Nirvana.
May they remain here for endless ages.
May they remain here for endless ages.
So that life in this world does not grow dark.
So that life in this world does not grow dark.
Mao, Dharma wondrous strange, profoundest mystery of the perfect ones. Within the birthless, all things take their birth. Yet in that birth, nothing is born. Mao, Dharma wondrous strange, profoundest mystery of the perfect ones. Within the ceaseless, all things cease to be. Yet in that ceasing, nothing ceases. Mao, Dharma wondrous strange, profoundest mystery of the perfect ones. Within the non-abiding, all abides, yet thus abiding, there abideth naught. Mao, Dharma wondrous strange, profoundest mystery of the perfect ones. In non-perception, everything is perceived, yet this perceiving is quite perceptionless. Mao, Dharma wondrous strange, profoundest mystery of the perfect ones. In the unmoving, all things come and go. Yet in that movement, nothing ever moves.
Heart Sutra. The Bodhisattva of compassion,
when he meditated deeply, saw the emptiness of all five skandhas, and sundered the bonds that caused him suffering. Here then, form is no other than emptiness, emptiness no other than form. Form is only emptiness, emptiness only form. Feeling, thought and choice, consciousness itself, are the same as this. All things are by nature void. They are not born or destroyed, nor are they stained or pure, nor do they wax or wane. So, in emptiness, no form, no feeling, thought or choice, nor is there consciousness, no eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind, no colour, sound, smell, taste, touch, or what the mind takes hold of, nor even act of sensing. No ignorance or end of it, nor all that comes of ignorance, no withering, no death, no end of them. Nor is there pain or cause of pain, or
or cease in pain, or noble path to lead from pain.
Not even wisdom to attain. Attainment too is emptiness. So know that Bodhisattva, holding to nothing whatever, that dwelling in practical wisdom, is freed of delusive hindrance, rid of the fear bred by it, and reaches clearest nirvana. All Buddhas of past and present, Buddhas of future time, using this prajna wisdom, come to full and perfect vision. Hear then the great Dharani, the radiant peerless mantra, the prajna paramitar, whose words allay all pain. Hear and believe its truth. Gate, gate, paragate, parasangate, bodhiswaha. Gate, gate, paragate, parasangate, bodhiswaha. Gate, gate, paragate, parasangate, bodhiswaha. Transference of merit and self-surrender. May the merit gained in my acting thus go to the alleviation of the suffering of all beings. My personality throughout my existences. My possessions. And my merit in all three ways. I give up without regard to myself. For the benefit of all beings. Just as the earth and other elements. Are serviceable in many ways. To the infinite number of beings. Inhabiting limitless space. So may I become. That which maintains all beings. Situated throughout space. So long as all have not attained.
Om Nahum Vajra Guru Padma Siddhi 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 Om Namma Vajra Guru Padma Siddhi. 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 Om Namma Vajra Guru Padma Siddhi.
that's all we've got time for tonight. I hope you all sleep well, and we'll see you